Entering the workplace can be a frightening experience for anyone. Though while it can be difficult for the able-bodied to find work, studies reveal it may be up to 5 times harder for those with a history of mental illness. Not only do they have to endure the normal setbacks faced by everyone looking for a job, they also have to decide whether they should tell prospective employers about their condition.
It's never been a problem in my personal life, but I'm concerned about it in my professional life. Yeah, I'm scared that maybe in the future my career might be impeded by one person's fear or ignorance of my illness.
All the evidence suggests people with mental health disorders are both able and capable of working. Unfortunately, however, some people with a history of mental health problems use fear of rejection as an excuse not to pursue job opportunities.
One of the dangers is that for people who have a mental health problem, who expect to be discriminated against, maybe they think, I won't apply for that job because I won't get a fair hearing and they won't appoint me, even though I'm a really good candidate. So if you like, they're expecting or anticipating rejection or discrimination. So they don't apply for the job, they don't get it.
Obviously, not applying for a position eliminates the need to consider the tell or don't tell question. The consequences, however, pose other problems.
We then have to help people who have mental health problems, often whose self-confidence plummets, who lose self-esteem, specifically to get confidence back, to make that application, to decide whether to disclose the condition or not. And then we have to help the employer to know that they're duty-bound, they have a legal duty to treat that person's application fairly under the Equality Act. So it's a question of helping the person with the condition and helping the employer so that that application will be dealt with on its merits in a fair way.
Supporters of the new Equality Act believe by making it illegal for employers to ask about any history of health problems, they have protected an applicant's rights. Others, however, believe by enshrining the privacy of the applicant in law, in reality, they have actually introduced almost mandatory consideration of the to tell or don't tell question. It is now a dilemma all job applicants must face, without any encouraging expert advice.
Until recently, for example, when you applied for a job, at the application stage on the paper form it says, do you have a health condition? Have you had diabetes or epilepsy, heart problems, or any mental illness? And there's a real dilemma about whether you should disclose anything, because if you did, that could be held against you. Now, fortunately in Britain, under the new Equality Act, you do not have to disclose any health information when you apply for a job on paper, nor at an interview is it lawful to ask about a health problem. But if you're offered the job, then there's another stage, and you go to an occupational health check, and then there'll be a questionnaire, then you might have an interview, and then there's still the dilemma, do you conceal or do you disclose? So my advice is that there's never a correct single answer. It very much depends on the person and the situation. And to some extent at the moment, it's a no-win situation. If you don't disclose, and it then becomes clear to your employer later, then you might have problems with your job because they said you didn't tell us. If you do disclose, you might go through quite a tough scrutiny process or even not get the job because they don't trust, the employer may not trust a person with a mental illness as much as the next person. So it's a very difficult decision. There's no simple correct answer to that dilemma.
An extensive study in 2013 by the Confederation of British Industry reported employee absenteeism at a record low. And while Professor Thornycroft acknowledges there may still be some malingerers in the workforce, he attributes the reduction in absenteeism to changed employee attitudes, not always healthy, stemming from the recent recession.
So sometimes people say, well, it's not that bad and people are malingering and it's not, they say they're depressed but they're just having a bad day and feel like taking a day off and so on. Now, occasionally that happens, but much more common is the opposite, where people who are actually severely depressed are putting on a happy face, getting themselves up, getting into work and pretending to be well, untreated maybe for months or years, but still not getting help, still not getting better, still not getting the help that they need, and then returning to be fully productive, either at work or fully participating in family life.
Lena Tochterman is a senior CBI advisor She says, in spite of the record low, there are still staggering costs associated with absenteeism.
Absence is at a record low nevertheless. Absence still costs the economy quite a significant chunk of money, so we found it was 14 billion which was lost, and quite a significant chunk of that is absence which was not necessarily necessary, so 1 out of 8 days was sick days.
While the record low is applauded, mental health issues are given as the main reason employees take time off.
So the employer will fill it in based on their record systems, so they would have recorded that somebody, for example, has been signed off with stress.
Richmond Fellowship is an organisation which tries to help those with mental health problems prepare for work. Lindsay O'Donnell recently took advantage of their service and benefited from their advice. She enrolled in one of the numerous courses they offer.
Initially we had an interview to establish the help that I needed, and as I say, because I was very much questioning what I was doing with my life and my career and my business, we sort of talked around that, and then quickly established that my CV was woefully out of date. So whatever I was going to do or any changes I was going to make, it was important to have the CV in good order for me to then, progress in whatever direction I wanted to. I then was booked onto a CV writing course, which I attended, which was incredibly helpful.
We run different courses here, so for personal development we run assertiveness courses and stress courses. The assertiveness course really looks at the skills that we lose when we're affected by mental ill health. So that can be self-esteem, self-confidence and really self-belief that we have the right to all of those things in life that when you haven't been affected by mental ill health you just take for granted. So giving those people the skills to feel okay about themselves, to take a job application and manage that rejection as well as part of the process really. We have courses on feeling stressed about returning to work, because that's a very real feeling for people. They've had a really negative experience and they need to work through that so that they feel confident to reapply again and put themselves back in that very vulnerable position.
While it is against the law for employers to ask applicants whether they have ever experienced mental illness, Richmond Fellowship is among those organisations which believe applicants should voluntarily tell.
We would have a discussion with every client about disclosure and their right to make that choice about whether they feel comfortable to disclose their mental health history or not. And we would talk about the benefits of doing that. So for them it's that protection that they've disclosed, that they've been honest with their employer, the support is in place. It might be that they are then protected by the Equality Act and reasonable adjustments. And we'd also help them to kind of see the benefits for the employer as well, and what that could afford for them as an employee if their employer knows what the situation is, and typically planning for in the event that they are going to be signed off sick. For example, communication can be a really stressful thing if you're suffering from anxiety or depression, but also for the employer to know that they've received a sick note from somebody and how do they contact them. So to have those things planned in advance. So we have a discussion with people about what the benefits are for disclosing or not disclosing.
Not unsurprisingly, the CBI agrees applicants should tell all.
So if you disclose it, you can make sure your employer supports you in the best possible way. If there's adjustments which would help the employee, I think it would be in their benefit.
Which raises the question, why would an employer want to hire someone with a history of mental illness?
Generally what we tend to see, and that's with mental health as well as generally disability or any other characteristics, is that employers choose the candidate which is best for the job. And if that candidate has a mental health issue, that's absolutely no issue. Employers want to employ the best person for the job. They don't care, and a lot of the adjustments for mental health issues are actually fairly cost effective. We found that employers are increasingly waking up to the issue. About 2/3 of large employers had formal procedures in place to manage stress and anxiety. That was slightly smaller for the smaller companies, but nevertheless they had informal practices in place. A very, very small percentage of firms didn't have any procedure in place to tackle with it. So businesses are waking up to this. They are understanding that their staff aren't performing as well as they could if they are under stress or if they have mental health issues, be they work-related or non-work-related, and they're actually doing something about it. So what we're seeing is that more and more companies are putting into place programs to either prevent mental health and stress in the first place or to detect it early, particularly around training the line managers and making sure they can spot things much earlier.
Clearly, to tell or not to tell remains an individual decision, with an unpredictable outcome. It is perhaps less than reassuring to know that, regardless of the choice, there are likely to be serious consequences.
For example, now, over 40 years ago, after my mother gave birth to my sister, my mother was working as a community nurse at the time, she developed a severe postnatal depression. She had to take a year off work, and in fact she needed what we call ECT, electroshock treatment, before she could improve. And she fully recovered, and then she went back to work, and she worked full-time for another 20 years, and then she retired. So recently I said to my mum, Mum, when you were ready to go back to work, you'd recovered from your depression, what did you say to your boss about why you'd been sick? And she said, nothing, absolutely nothing. Are you mad? I wouldn't have had my job back if I'd said.